Welcome to the Ashford Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Catherine Myers, and I will be your host for this session. I'm excited to introduce an investigation into factors that impact retention of online students, presented by Judy Donovan and Chris Sorensen. The chat window will be open during this session for your comments, and we will have a short Q&A at the close of this session. Now, without further ado, Judy and Chris.
Thank you, Catherine, and welcome, everybody. If we could go to the next slide, Catherine. I really want to thank these people in particular. They helped a great deal with data collection, research support, ideas, connecting us with the right people, and lots more. So thank you all. On the next slide, we'll give you a brief overview of what we want to accomplish today. Just a little bit of background on the issue of retention in online for-profit universities. Then most of the presentation will be our study, what we learned. We will also talk about some implications that we drew from our study, a little bit on Ashford and what they're doing in the past and what they're doing now. And then the highlight, we really want to hear from you. We'd like to hear what the individual colleges are doing, what you're doing in your classroom, any and all suggestions and ideas for what we can do to improve student retention. The chat will be open during our presentation, but we are going to clear it at the end. So if you post a question, please make sure you copy and paste it later on when we can answer it. Okay? So please hold questions until the end. If we could look at the next one, Catherine. This chart, this graph shows that private for-profit institutions in particular have a really large challenge with retention and graduation rates. This definitely kind of shows the need for research to learn about and improve the retention of students at these institutions. And if we look at the next slide, we see the numbers for Ashford. These are 2013, 2014 numbers because that's the data that we used in our studies. And we also used College of Education students. So you'll see that Ashford was about 40% retention rate across all colleges. And the College of Ed, and we're only looking at undergraduates, was a little higher at 43. So if we look at the next slide, we have some data that tells us why students leave. At Ashford, students who discontinue their education are asked to complete a withdrawal survey. 71% of all students that complete the survey list no reason. So MIA, or missing in action, is the drop reason. It was this large group of students that we became particularly interested in. And Chris will go to the next slide, Catherine, and Chris will start describing our study.
All right, thank you, Judy. Just quick mic check. Can I get a thumbs up or a yes in the chat room just to make sure everyone can hear me okay? Yes? Okay, good. Perfect. Thank you, guys. So moving into the research that we did. So on the previous slide, it was seen that MIA, or missing in action, is the common, what we know for the majority of our students. We don't know why that they're dropping. So we decided to focus in on this particular group of MIA students and just kind of investigate, try to determine some potential factors that may have contributed to them dropping out. We used a mixed methods approach. We collected data from university databases, we found a survey, we did classroom walkthroughs, did some interviews, and like I said, we were specifically focused in on kind of the subset of MIA students who we don't know why they're dropping out, and specifically these were students who identified as declaring majors in one of 5 undergrad COE programs. And again, as Judy mentioned, it was specifically with the 2013-2014 year. Here's just an overview of the data collection and analysis. So I'll start up there at the top. We start with a larger data set of 396 students. For each of these students, we recorded the number of courses they took, as well as the last 2 courses they took, the grades, advisors, and instructors within those last 2 courses, and their overall GPA prior to dropping out. If we move over to the right, we took those students, we grouped them into 1 of 3 groups based on the number of courses they took, And then from here, we ran a MANOVA, specifically looking at the 3 groups and GPA and the course grades. We also, kind of moving down the middle, we created a list of some of the most frequently last courses taken by these students before they dropped out, and came up with about 6 courses that were some of the most frequently last ones taken before they dropped out. And then we randomly selected 10 students from each of these 6 courses, so a total of 60 students, and we conducted classroom walkthroughs looking for potential evidence, and we'll get into that. We also looked at the end-of-course survey data, and then we also sent out a survey over there to the left. We had a low response rate of 18 participants returned the survey, so data nonetheless, is good data. And we conducted some interviews based on some of the students who were willing to be interviewed, as well as some more in-depth analysis of some of the students who completed the survey. So what we're going to do now is kind of walk through each of these areas where we collected data and share some of our findings with you. Starting with the MANOVA. So we grouped, like I said, 3 groups. Group 1 were students who took 3 or less courses before they dropped out. Group 2 took 4 to 10, and then group 3 were 11 or more courses before they dropped out. And again, the dependent variables that we looked at between these groups were GPA and then the grades in the last 2 courses. So the MANOVA really kind of focused on academic performance between the 3 groups. Now, the MANOVA did come back statistically significant. So there was evidence that would suggest that there was a difference between these 3 groups and those 3 variables. When we dug deeper and did some follow-up tests, we found differences specifically with GPA and the last course grade. So looking at GPA, that first bullet point there, a difference between groups 1 and 3 and 2 and 3. And in both cases, the mean of group 3 was higher. And so the general trend with GPA, and this is kind of confirmed with a positive correlation, was that the more courses a student took, the higher their GPA was. So when you look at that, you kind of think, does that make sense? And most of us would probably agree that if students are taking more courses, there's probably a higher likelihood that they're passing them, maybe doing a little better, which then would reflect in a higher GPA. Now the second key difference was that last course grade, specifically between groups 1 and 2 and 1 and 3. And in this situation, there was a negative correlation. So the trend here was the more courses a student took, the lower their grade was in the very last course that they took. And we think there's probably some room for discussion and further investigation here, because you could pose questions like, these students who were further along, were they just running out of steam, and did they just give up, and that resulted in a lower grade? Were students who dropped out sooner, were they trying harder, but despite them trying harder, they still, because when you look at the mean, it's still at 62.9, so it still is relatively low, that be a D. But are they still trying harder? But despite them trying harder, they're still not able to get those higher grades. So like I said, there may be some more room for discussion here and further investigation with this last course grade. We also thought we'd take a look at kind of high performers and low performers within each group. So within each group, we identified the number of students who had a GPA of 2.0 or below, and students who had a GPA of 3.0 or above. So kind of low and high performers is indicated by their GPA. And I kind of just squared off, what we consider the high performers, just to illustrate that we do have students who do very well, in this learning environment, being at a for-profit online institution. There can sometimes be a stigma, with institutions like ours, that the only students that seek out our institutions are those who maybe struggle academically. But we do have, there was about 22%, so a good chunk of students within our sample were doing very well academically. So we can kind of look at these students and begin to say, well, we can rule out factors like these students aren't struggling academically, and maybe that's not a factor that contributed to them dropping out, and therefore it was something else. And with that said, there's still is a chunk of students who do look to be struggling academically. So, we can't rule out, academic performance as, being a contributing factor. Moving on to the survey. So I'm going to go through 3 specific questions that we asked. There were more questions, but just for the purpose of time and interest within this presentation, I'm going to present 3. The first question is we asked the students, why did you enroll at Ashford University? And the number 1 reason was flexibility to complete coursework on their own schedule. And this is pretty much in line with any research, that I've ever, read as far as why students seek out online education. The second highest reason why they enrolled was they felt that the university offered a degree that was aligned to their career goals. Next 2 tied. One was affordable education compared to other universities, and then flexible assessment standards. And then finally, the last one was convenience. Then we asked, why did you discontinue your studies at Ashford? And the number 1 reason was that they became too busy with work or family. Second one, they felt like they weren't receiving the necessary support from faculty and advisors. Next 2 tied, it felt like the course material was too difficult or that they were unable to continue due to financial reasons. And then finally, the next 2, tied to the next spot, felt like they weren't receiving a quality education. And then we just had very, unique, reasons. One student needed a break, another one had technology issues, a student had a disability that worsened, and one felt that they were misled and misplaced into a program. So a couple interesting pieces of information here. 3 out of 4 who indicated not receiving a quality education also said, because they were able to check more than one, for the reasons. So 3 of the 4 who said they weren't receiving a quality education also indicated that they weren't receiving the necessary support from faculty and advisors. And so this is an important takeaway because students, we can begin to see that students don't just view, things like course design and as quality education. Students are, they look at the interactions and the support that they're getting from the institution as a factor in the quality of the education that they're getting. And then also, there were 5 students who indicated that the reason why they enrolled was flexibility. Okay. Well, actually, there were more than 5, but 5 students who indicated flexibility as the main reason. Those same 5 students said that the reason why they dropped out or discontinued their studies was that they became too busy with work or family. And so this is kind of interesting because flexibility is it's a big selling point, with online education. We say you can work full time, you can have a family, you can be involved in your community, and you can also pursue an education. So, this raises questions as to how well students might be gauging their abilities to juggle multiple priorities and have that work-life balance. Right. Okay, and then finally, with the survey, we asked, what could AU have done to retain you? And interesting thing here is all the answers really focused on supports, specifically course support, financial support, staff institutional support, and motivational support. And kind of pulling out some quotes from the students. Course support, more support and advice on how to complete assignments properly. Set me up with payment options. Yeah, they need to listen and pay attention to what the student is wanting to do for their career. I'm really disappointed in the counseling that I got. And then motivation. One student just said, motivate me more. And then finally, another student said, yes, it would be great if Ashford University could offer stuff like free tablets to students enrolled after such weeks of class. It would help the attention of many students to take classes with Ashford. So, this last one kind of, might make you chuckle a little bit because it's a little unrealistic that we're going to be handing out iPads to all of our students after they complete X amount of courses. But, what we can take away from that is students, at least this student, is asking for some type of external motivation. we have a lot of students who come to the university with intrinsic motivation, specifically wanting to advance their career, wanting to make a better life for themselves or their family. And so you would think that that's pretty strong motivation, but maybe it's not strong enough to keep them in the programs and keep them going. All right, I'm going to pass it back over to Judy, who's going to kind of talk a little bit about the interviewing and some more in-depth analysis of some of the students that we did who completed the survey.
Thank you, Chris. We did get some in-depth comments from students, both verbally and in email and on the survey. And I want to look at these a little bit more because they support some of the things that Chris has been saying and go in a couple different directions also. So, for example, this first student, okay, is saying the advisor didn't re-enroll me. He failed to do so. So, you know, he's still in limbo as far as we can tell by this comment. Well, you know, when we took a closer look at the student that made this comment, we found additional factors or considerations that they had not mentioned. For example, the first student was most likely dropped for academic performance, okay? And that's the issue, that the student is just really not cutting it. Look at the second one. The second one, the student is saying, my financial aid was applied incorrectly. You know, I don't have the money to pay for these last two courses. A closer look shows that the student probably failed to complete a financial aid form on time or something similar such as that. I mean, I'm not arguing with the students and what they believe, but I'm getting, what I've learned from this research study is that often students do not see where they may have contributed to their challenges or may not see things the way that we see them. So let's look at a big part of this survey, which was classroom observations. We went in and we really examined how students were performing and interacting in the classrooms. We wanted to find reasons for dropping, and we found valuable information in the students' introductory posts, in the instructor feedback, in their grades, in their own discussion posts, and in their work. We took a very deep look at some students. We were very interested in students that had completed many courses at Ashford with a respectable grade point average. They were doing great, but then they dropped out of the program. We wanted to know why these students didn't complete. So we found we found several students that failed the same course over and over. Another student you can see has strong writing issues that he does need help with. He doesn't want to fall behind in controlling things around himself. As Chris has kind of alluded to, several students really had a lot going on, maybe too much. I mean, one student had 6 children under 15 years old that she was the caregiver for. Another was working 3 jobs. So students were, you know, that's one of the reasons I think they need flexibility. They're juggling a lot. We know this. We know this already. There are students. So self-regulation and time management. I just thought this was a great comment. If I get the children where they're supposed to be on time, I'm late. Or if I get up early and dress myself first, well, the children has a bad day and we're all late. So it's a never-ending battle in her household. So one of the interviews that I had was with a BAES student, okay, which is educational studies, the Bachelor's in Educational Studies. And she was one of the group that we identified as having completed a large number of classes with a very acceptable GPA. And it was interesting interviewing her after examining her performance and her comments in her classes. The first thing I noticed was that she was confronted with plagiarism in her last class, and after the instructor informed her this was not acceptable, that was the end of her. She did not post again. She didn't turn in any additional work in the course. She never enrolled in another course. She was gone. So I went back and I checked previous courses, and there was plagiarism in previous assignments, but it had not been caught by the instructor. And I also noticed some APA and other writing errors in her work. All right. Well, one of the interview questions, we asked the students whether Ashford's support for writing an APA was sufficient for them. Her answer, this student said, oh, yes, I never used it. She said, I'm an excellent writer. She said she was the only student in one of her classes who got 100% on a paper. So she didn't need any support and didn't use it. Okay, so very much a different interpretation of this student from what I saw and how she sees things. This student also had an issue with accommodation, okay? At least two instructors that I, as far back as I went, they chastised her for late work in the grade book, but then ended up apologizing because they realized she had accommodation and it wasn't late. One instructor just couldn't seem to remember that she had extra time. This reminds me of what Newton was saying just now in the keynote, if you got to hear Dr. Miller talking. I mean, the student then also reported to me that one professor would not accept her work because he said it was late, so she had to get the Office of Disabilities to intervene. She said her instructors argued with her and did not know what the accommodation was, and this was supported by the instructor feedback in the course. So the student says she dropped because she realized she was not getting a teaching certificate, and she now is attending Grand Canyon University, okay? But when you take a deeper look at the students, you find that it is a complex issue. I know this isn't anything new, but it's not only a complex issue, but students see it a little differently than we do. We'll take a look at these two students from American Samoa. These students had a very clear goal when they started the program, and it really, to me, it's a shame that they did not reach this goal. American Samoa, Department of Education, the director issued a directive that all public school teachers have to have a Bachelor of Education degree by the end of 2016, okay? And they're doing this to battle low student performance in the public schools. Sorry. More than 50% of teachers in American Samoa hold an Associate of Arts degree or less. So now this student, this is a BAES student again, she doesn't need a teaching certificate. She just needs a Bachelor in Education. So these two students, they're perfect for that program. And you can see that flexibility and convenience was why they started. They have this passion for teaching. But they had some unique challenges. Weather was a real issue. Hurricane season was a real issue. Internet access was problematic for them. They've had some writing issues. We saw a little bit of plagiarism in one student in her written assignment that even spread to her discussion post. She plagiarized as early as her 5th class, and these students completed 11 and 12 courses respectively. She plagiarized as early as class 5, but she really wasn't caught until her last class when she earned a 0 on an assignment. So we observed that both students would benefit from flexible deadlines. It was very heartbreaking to see the students turn in work just a day late or 2 days late and always get a 0 on it. It seemed they always just missed the deadline because of internet, because of weather, because of something. And because of these zeros, they ended up, failing classes. So we really thought that, if there were more flexible deadlines for students in their situations, we really thought that this would help them. And then instructors who consistently run posts and assignments who turn it in and teach them how to cite correctly, instructors that give meaningful feedback. We really thought that with support, these students could have been successful. So Chris is going to talk next about some of the course walkthroughs. Oh, there you go.
All right, thank you, Judy. So yes, just to recap, we identified 6 courses that were some of the most frequently last courses taken before the students dropped out, and then we randomly selected 10 students from each of these courses, and we went into the course looking for evidence that might suggest factors why they dropped out. And we used some previous research to help guide us, what we might be looking at, specifically looking at or looking for student-related factor, course program-related factors, and then environmental-related factors. And of the 60 students that we reviewed, 51 of them offered some type of potential evidence of at least one of these factors. Looking just at a quick frequency, the student-related factors were most frequently followed by course program and environmental. A student-related factor would be things related to academic performance, maybe experience that they brought into the classroom, skills related to time management or that work life, being able to balance, juggle priorities, and then also psychological attributes such as motivation, being goal-oriented, interested in the subject matter. And then the course program factors would be things like course design, things related to institutional or faculty support in the classroom, and then also interaction with the students as well as the faculty. And then the environmental factors would be things related to work commitment and also like those unexpected life events that seem to pop up. So looking at the student factors, the most frequent areas were skills and the psychological attributes that we saw. And some evidence of this, one student says, I really don't, or I don't really like psychology classes because I just don't think I get it or want to get it. This will be the third time trying to take a psychology class. I dropped out twice before in traditional school. So we have a real disinterest in the subject matter, and the student is telling us that they've dropped out before in traditional school. Next to, I felt I was doing online learning would be beneficial for me since I have to juggle work, motherhood, and now school. So again, the student specifically using the word juggle in her comment. And again, we know that we have a lot of students who, kind of fit into that category. Another student just said, I was having a very, very difficult time trying to make this work. I think I took on more than I could handle. And then finally, as far as technology goes, I only use it if I have to. Otherwise, I'm old-fashioned. I really do not want to have to use the webcam at all. Since I need to for this course, I will cautiously engage. I feel this way because I'm a private person and really do not care for online networking at all. So, we have this issue with this mindset, very negative mindset towards technology. Yet the student has decided to, pursue the education and in an online modality, which is, just surrounded by technology. Moving on to the course program factors, most frequent areas were probably related to program knowledge and instructor interaction. So one student said, my major at Ashford University is education, and I'm strongly considering changing my major to education counseling. So you read this, that's no big deal, right? And most of us have probably changed our majors during undergrad. The key thing here is that we don't offer a degree in education counseling, at this point in the College of Education at Ashford. So that option, if that's what the student wants to do, that option may not have been available for her to continue. And then my major will most likely be changing to cog studies so I can pursue a career in occupational therapy or in that area. Again, changing your major, no big deal. Cog studies is okay. We offer that program within the College of Ed. But you look at what the student wants to do, and it's in the area of occupational therapy. And so there could be kind of a misalignment here between the degree, COG studies, and what the student is wanting to do. I did a quick Google define of occupational therapy, and the definition was a form of therapy for those recuperating from physical or mental illness that encourages rehabilitation through the performance of activities required in daily life. So, first thing that pops into my head is something like physical therapy and getting a degree or certification within that area. So again, there may have ended up being this misalignment or knowledge between degree and what it is the student wants to do. And then the instructor interaction was another area. So we know, two main areas were interaction with the instructor first, discussions and assignment feedback. So there were a good handful of instructors that weren't, carrying on conversations in the discussion, meaning the student, posts, I, the instructor, go in and I respond to the student, maybe pose a question, and then that student responds back to me, and then I do nothing, And so as the instructor, you want to get in there and kind of carry on that conversation, that dialogue with the student. There were, although, it's not a lot, there were a few instructors that actually weren't addressing students by name or signing off with their name. And it's pretty amazing, at least in my mind, how the tone of the discussion or a post can really do a 180 when all you do is you put the student's name, put your post, and then sign off with your name. And then finally a couple instructors are doing what we tell our students not to do, and that's those shallow responses, good posts, great work. So, there is some lack of interaction, in some of the discussions. And when we talk about student retention, if you've seen, other presentations that deal with student retention, you'll see things like community, consistently brought up. And so you're not really going to develop a pretty, strong sense of community if you're not, being present in those discussion forums. And then the assignment feedback, you see 11 instructors were offering a little bit of summative feedback on assignments, no in-text. One instructor that was offering no summative, a little bit of in-text, and then 13 instructors that were basically giving no feedback at all on a student's assignments. And so that's too bad because students put in all this work, they're looking at us for guidance and to help them in the classes, and then when they hear nothing back from the instructor, again, you're not going to feel very supported. You're not going to feel like there's much of a sense of community within your classroom. And then finally, environmental factors. So the two key areas here were work commitment and life events. So we had one student who said, my computer malfunctioned this week and I lost the first draft of this assignment. This week was hell. My mom was back and forth from home to the hospital. I put in 60-hour work week and my boyfriend had a heart attack. So I don't know. You can't help but to, oh my goodness, when you read something like this with the student. And the student went through all this in this class and didn't sign up and didn't take any other courses. Next student, I was in school before and had to drop out because of a family issue, so I had to prove to myself that school was my main list to complete. The only goal I have for myself is to better myself and life. So, the student has motivation, that intrinsic motivation looks like to get back into school, but they're also telling us that, they've had problems in the past, and as a result, they've ended up dropping out. Next student, I have a beautiful fiance that is also pregnant with our first child. She is also on dialysis due to kidney failure, so we are taking everything one step at a time. And then I'm a 911 dispatcher. I love my job and being able to help individuals in time of need. It is a very stressful job at times, and I work very long hours. So we have some real, strong work commitments here. So to sum up, if we look back at all those areas that we kind of looked at, collected data, and if we're going to create a list of some of the most contributing or potential contributing factors, it looks like we have students that are taking on potentially more than they can handle. They're misjudging their ability to juggle multiple priorities. There could be an academic ability factor, but it could be a little bit more difficult to pinpoint if it's direct or indirect, meaning is the student really struggling academically with the content, or are they having a hard time managing their time and balancing everything, which is then indirectly affecting their grade and their GPA, things like that. There are the psychological attributes, potentially coping with stress, losing that motivation, that negative mindset towards technology and subject matter. We could have program misplacement and or program goal career misalignment that's occurring, a lack of support from faculty and staff. Students were flat out saying that, and then financial reasons, and then just some smaller, other, unexpected life events. They may not be a good fit for online learning and or accelerated program, and the program doesn't lead to a teaching certificate, which, I will say in the College of Education, this last teaching certificate part, we are working to change that, and in the future we will be offering a pathway for students to earn that teaching certification. Judy.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Well, what can we do? We have a list of some things that we came up with. I'll let you kind of pursue that list. Retention, we have found, is a complex issue. And usually there are a combination of factors that cause a student to discontinue their studies. One thing we can look for clues that students are unconsciously giving us. A good place to look for these, we found, is in the introduction post. especially if students express anxiety about academic success, and we found this to be fairly common. But also look for students who have dropped out before, seem to be interested in something other than the degree they're in, are juggling multiple responsibilities, or are using words like challenging, undecided, uncertain, afraid. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of these very, very quickly. The first one is to be proactive. And then, you know, if we could offer more flexible course options, maybe some self-paced students for self-paced courses for some students. Students, as we both have said, tend to overestimate their skills and their time. So we really, really need to help students recognize how much time they have available. Help them to self-assess so they recognize their weaknesses in writing and study skills and things like this. Students really need a realistic picture of what they can handle and where they're at. And Newton talked about this too. Okay, let students know where they're at and where they need to improve. And the sooner we do this, the better. Possibly a student-friendly leave policy would help many students come back, especially if we stayed in touch with them. If you know, the advisor could call them once every couple of weeks and say, how are things going? Think you're coming back soon, or something like that. We found almost 10% of the students in our original group of data had come back to Ashford already. Here they were listed as discontinuing studies in 2013-14, but now in 2015, when we looked up their courses, they were back. So students will come back even after a prolonged absence. So for our research, we're going to examine specific groups in more detail. We're going to examine much of the data in areas we didn't get into yet, such as advisors, instructors, things like that. We want to see if any more students have re-enrolled lately. We want to replicate the study with graduate students, and we want to look more deeply at specific risk factors, such as being a male or a minority student. To conclude, to wrap up the last part of this presentation, you will see that those two things that we're going to do with the graduate students and the minority students really relate well to the Ashford current initiative. So we want to just take a couple of minutes to go over what Ashford has done in terms of retention initiatives, okay, and what the 2015 plan is, and then we really, really want to hear from you, okay? So 5 initiatives during 2012, okay, and they were successful. All right, they especially combined. Students were 17% more likely to be retained after the implementation plan with these 5 initiatives was put in place than prior to its implementation. Okay, so it really, really worked in 2012. They did some great things. The 2015 plan is to the current retention goal focuses on steady yearly improvement. So they want 1% increase a year in the retention and the graduation numbers. How are they going to do it? The initiatives are broken out into 3 categories. And individualized student experience, diverse students, and graduate level students. So I'm not going into this much. You can actually, there's a TLC session on CHAMPS that you can attend. There's several TLC sessions that talk about learning and social communities. Okay, so basically you can learn more about these from your college or from some of the sessions here at the TLC. But individualized student experience is a plan for retention. Another plan for retention is supporting diverse students. As you heard, again, if you're at the keynote, African Americans are 44% of our students, and Latinos are 9%. But the retention rate is 9 percentage points lower than the rate for white students for African Americans. And males are also, they're retained at a lesser rate. Finally, supporting our graduate students. And some of these initiatives are really, have really been successful already. Transitioning from undergraduate to graduate, that's the SMART program, and I believe there's a TLC session about that if you want to learn more about that. And then there's plans to support graduate students academically, especially minorities and males. And then the Graduate Student Lifestyle, that's another initiative to help the retention rate of graduate students. Okay, so now we really want to hear from you. Any retention strategies or ideas that you have found successful, anything your college is doing or you're doing in your classroom that you would like to share, we want to hear about. What kind of additional retention research would you like to see from us or from Ashford? Do you have any questions or comments? Please put them in the chat box. And thank you very much for attending this session from both Chris and I. And thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Judy. While everyone is typing in, I just want to thank you both for sharing this topic with us. It's so relevant. Retention is such a hot topic here that I love that the two of you did this and then are taking the time to share your results with us. And I really look forward to see the questions that come up in our chat. I think we have about...
Yeah, so oh.
I just want to say we have about 7 minutes for questions and stuff, so have at it.
Great. Yeah, I see Susan said that she contacts the students who are struggling or not checking into class. I know, there's been some work done that really emphasizes the importance of those first 2 weeks of your presence and the student performance in the class. I know for me, I'm very active, especially in those first 2 weeks. I send out that email Monday reminding students that the class is starting. Tuesday, we know that their intro posts are due. So the first thing I do on Wednesday is I take inventory of who didn't post their introduction post. And I reach out to them. Hey, did you remember class started? Do you need any help getting started? And then first thing on Friday, I take inventory of who posted or who didn't post on, for the discussion in week 1. Thursday night, and again, reach out to those. So, making that multiple points of contact within that first week is definitely important. And then, April is mentioning sending out many emails those first 2 weeks to those students. Let's see here. Let's see. Susan says.
Felicia.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. I just noticed Felicia Banks says she uses videos and real-life examples, to convey concepts, and so that's individualizing instruction. That's supporting one of the Ashford initiatives in the current retention plan. It's a great example, Felicia.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Susan mentions using that turning in and identifying those plagiarism issues, but using that as a teachable moment. And that's true. I mean, a lot of students, if they're coming back to school and they've been out for a while and they haven't been taught how to properly cite research and using APA format, instead of, cracking the whip, that first time, use that as a teachable moment to teach your students what they're doing wrong and why it's wrong, and point them to those resources like Grammarly and Turnitin, encourage them to use those resources as well.
And Chris, what we saw was a continued pattern of plagiarism if students are not caught early and corrected, given a chance to correct their work. Then they continued plagiarizing until then it was a big shock when they were caught, and by that time, I'm sure they're not even sure how to write anymore. So the earlier that we can check for plagiarism and help the student learn how to do it correctly, the better.
Very good point.
Diane, I provide my phone number also. I really, okay, one student has abused it in 25 years of teaching, and that's it. It's just students are respectful of it and use it when they absolutely have to. And texting is just great. I agree.
Yeah, and then Shane says many of our students have never been told that any of their ideas are worthy of sharing, and so that's I think that goes, kind of back into creating that kind of that safe community environment, letting your students know that you want to hear from them and what they do have to say is valuable. And again, that's gonna add to that feeling of support and just giving them an overall positive feeling about and wanting to be in the classroom.
More and more as I read these comments and I look at the sessions in this TLC, I'm seeing common threads and common themes throughout them. I'm seeing that we know how to retain our students. We know what works. It's pulling it all together and doing it and finding what works for individual students. So, point. Yeah, look at Felicia with the real person. Yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just going to say another comment about bringing in those real classroom stories as an example. I know when I was in, I started off in the sciences, and it wasn't until I got into, my master's that I went into education. But I loved hearing those stories that other practitioners brought into the classroom, and just kind of gave me an idea. Because a lot of our students, especially, at least in the College of Ed, we can speak to, they're looking to make career changes into education. So, if we can share those stories, it excites it. It excited me, being able to hear those stories and what kind of lays ahead.
It's so important, Chris. Especially first-time college students that really have no idea what kind of work college-educated people do. So, yes, I agree. Felicia, I think it was Jackie Kiger and Bill Davis that just did a coffee chat or whatever they're calling those. I forget what it's called, but yesterday they talked about putting a picture of the instructor in the classroom, how important it is. Having a video of yourself talking, how important it is to convey that you're a real person, okay, to begin to build a relationship. Awesome. Connie, that is a great idea. Just sending weekly messages like that. That is awesome. Connie says, after week 2, I contact students who are close to the 70th percentile via email, and she invites them to send her their telephone number and a good time to call so they can converse one-on-one. That's a great idea.
And Jeff, yeah, I agree. I'm always disappointed too when they put a picture of a dog or a flower instead of who they are, because I love to see who my students are. It really, just like same flip side, they can see who I am. It makes everyone kind of a little bit more human in this technology-driven environment.
There is a learning platform where a picture of the student comes up next to every post. I would love to see that here.
Uh-huh.
Bag over your head.
I know.
Great comments from everybody. Thank all of you. It's a great idea.
No, this is great comments.
Well, thank you again. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end, but thank you again to Judy, Donovan, and Chris Sorensen for your presentation, as well as to all of you for attending and your participation in the chat. It's been wonderful. This presentation will be available for viewing in the CETL soon, and we'll send out an email when the live sessions are available. Don't forget to go to the TLC app and rate this session. And while you're still in the room, use the link that is listed below the presentation for the end of session survey. It'll be a quick one for you. And then look for an end of conference survey to provide more in-depth feedback. Thank you again for all of your hard work and participation, and have a wonderful day.